So thank you for joining today and rushing to do everything so early in the morning for yourselves. So I'm Marziya. I am the deputy editor of Gelada. I'm based in Perth, Western Australia, and I wanted to start off by acknowledging that I live in a place where we're settled on stolen lands, and to pay respect to the traditional custodians of the land, the indigenous people of this area, who are the Wajak Noongar people, and to pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and also to the indigenous leaders on all other lands that may be viewing or being part of this recording. And what we're going to be talking about today is very much around that idea of how we work with languages and preserve these languages that are not necessarily as well known beyond their boundaries and borders until they are brought forward by various means, and our means are very visual. So we are engaging in translation in a much more visual way, in a multimedia way. And what I'm hoping today is that we work through this, we have a conversation about what prompted us to take the directions that we did in terms of our engagement and interpretations of this text. So I might ask you to introduce yourself, Laura, and if you can introduce the work that you did as well, very briefly.
Oh, absolutely. My name is Laura, and I actually studied as an illustrator. I'm in the LA area, and Jimmy had invited me to be a part of this exhibit, and I was very excited about it because as an illustrator, we really just learn how to tell a story through our art. And so being able to create a narrative art is something that I really enjoy doing. And of course, Googie's story is amazing. So I definitely want to be a part of this.
And yourself, Jimmy, what prompted you to work with this particular text by Ngugi?
Well, I'm creating at Casa 101. Also, I've done a independent creation at the Mercantile and other galleries around Los Angeles. Well, I had the opportunity to be in discussion with Professor Ngugi. Let's say for some years when I first met him. I was doing research on Fanon, Frantz Fanon, and it sort of happens that Ngugi's name popped up, and a couple of books popped up too, moving the center and decolonizing the mind. So that intrigued me, and ever since then, we've been in conversation. I had the opportunity to go and visit his office at UCI, and when we started talking, and then he was the book had been out, and that's when he said, well, here, take. He gave me a copy of something on the upright revolution, and when I read it and when we discussed it, and he showed me some work that was being done on the visuals. It's sort of we came to the conclusion, well, it'd be great if we can do something, invite some artists from Boyle Heights in Los Angeles, from my community, to read it and see where we can take it. And it was a great experience to have Laura and many others. It traveled. It was at Casa 101 first, theater and Boyle Heights, and then it traveled over to the Mercantile Culture Center in Fullerton, California. So that was good. I think that was a great challenge, and also a good way to extend the conversation, the narrative, from literature, to the visuals. Yes.
And here's Ernesto, just in time.
Okay, perfect.
Hi, Ernesto.
Hello.
We're just
Ernesto.
introducing ourselves and also talking about how we came about our own interpretations of Professor Ngugi's work. Can you hear us, Ernesto?
Yes, I can. Would you want me to talk piece?
Just talk about the work. Maybe just a really brief overview of how you started engaging with Professor Ngugi's work and your own interpretation of it. So we're just doing a really brief intro to our own engagements with the work.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Well, when I first was introduced to the story by Jimmy Centano, he invited me to participate in this exhibit, and here check out this story. This author, he's very well known from Kenya, so take and see. I read the story and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with it because I really enjoy literature that is based off of some cultural creation stories in a sense. And I also love the fact that it was very imaginative and very playful. So to me, it took me back to I feel like I could be a little bit more of a child, reach into my thing. And so the first made is lock cutting and printing, and the images of a individual that's somewhat falling. So he's like upside down in the air and he's falling, and he has this look of confusion. And so to me, it gives that that sense of not really having full control of himself. And I really also wanted to add a little bit more of a animated or cartoon type of feeling, especially since, like I mentioned, that the story itself really took me back to my childhood, and getting into animations and cartoons was how I began creating artwork. Really, that core me of back to like I'm saying, just kind of being a youth again. And so I decided to dig into that to create that piece.
Well, that's really great. I'm actually going to pick on Jimmy now again, purely because, like, I was going to go in order, but you said something that really sparked with me, that you mentioned that you were looking at Frantz Fanon. And
Yes.
ironically, that was also what I was reading at the time when I was creating the illustrations for this project, the flaming person. So I had just started reading Wretched of the Earth at that time. And, so there's definitely that influence that has kind of followed through. And my own relationship with Ngugi's works has been since school. I grew up in Kenya. I went to school in Kenya, and so was familiar with Professor Ngugi's works. But I think it's really at more this stage, even though I've moved away, where I have more of an appreciation. But yeah, when you mentioned Fanon, I just was like, yep, I totally get that connection there, because that was such a big influence in also my own visualization of the fable, and it definitely played in. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And I was just going to say, if you could maybe expand more on the ideas in there, like particularly thinking about using visuals as a decolonizing / anti-colonial practice, maybe.
Yes. Well, I think Frantz Fanon emphasized the aspect of culture in the liberating process, and I think for our community, the Latino community, and the talent we have, and also the concern for our community, like Ernesto is very active in the community and assisting issues that are of concern, and yet at the same time, he's an artist. And Laura too, also a very committed artist to bringing awareness, but also a lot of our work has to do with dignity, the dignity of our community. Now, and so Fanon, I think that was one of the bases of his, of his whole concept, is that recuperating dignity, and the dignity was recuperated through the process of liberation, through the process of decolonizing, to start viewing yourself in a perspective where you're no longer sort of how could I say a mimic or duplicate of a certain way of seeing yourself or understanding your history and your culture that minimizes that, doesn't give it the value. And so in Gugi's story, and with Fanon, in Gugi sort of extends that call for dignity and call for awareness. And so the story Upright Revolution is really sort of has a decolonizing thread in it, in the sense that you become aware of wholeness. Modern cultures, modern societies are made of individuals, and individuality is very much emphasized in our culture, and modern Western cultures. And so, with colonization, the communal aspect, or the community aspect sort of, got put in the back burner. And the story of Upright has a lot to do with acknowledging, becoming aware that every part plays a role, and giving it some pride, giving it some dignity and awareness. Most of all, I think that's what it is. So, yes, Fanon and decolonizing the mind, the emphasis on language, diverse languages, is very crucial to sort of recuperate the essence of a culture that's probably not in line with the dominant society, or the dominant way of seeing. In this case, would be Western cultures or Eurocentric cultures, let's say. So yes, that's where I make the connection with Fanon and Ngugi. And I know Ngugi has done a lot of research. I mean, he's one of the persons, I believe, that has he's studied, and also has been an influence in his work. So we're extending that too, in that conversation at a level of community, and in ways through art and the visual, especially culture, and art and literature, very important aspects of communication, of expression, for awareness, to ask questions, and to evaluate who we are as a community, as an individual, through art. Yes, that's where I see the connection. So I agree. I agree with the fact that that's a starting point. Yeah.
Thanks for that. I want to move on to Laura, because you mentioned that dignity is something that Laura has been quite, like is prevalent in your art, if I'm not mistaken, and
Yeah,
those kind of things.
Right, definitely.
I
think
so
that,
could you talk a bit about that?
yeah, I come from a Christian background, and so his story really resonates with me. I think the idea of, we are one body with many parts, that's very much a part of my belief. And the idea that that all of us have a role, that we all play a role in this life, and that none of us is less important than any other one. And so I loved that about his story, that when the body celebrates, we all celebrate. When we fall, basically we all fall. We all feel that pain. And so I think that that I really try to incorporate that into my painting, Rise Up. And I did that just by including a lot of the words that I feel are so important. I actually have the painting with me, so I'm gonna show it to you really quick.
Yeah, I've only seen a very small version of it online,
but
tiny
this is
bit
it here. Yeah.
So yeah, that is really lovely.
So you can see.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Beautiful.
and really what I was trying to incorporate was just a lot of symbolism, because that that really does for me, it says so much, you know. And so, I mean, just looking at the image, you know, I start at the top. Well, actually, I'm going to start at the bottom. And the idea is that there's the figure that's been completely dismembered. You know, the body is in all the different parts and pieces, and it's completely disconnected. And so on there it says, we are all connected, as strong as we are united, as weak as we are divided. And the idea is that here's this elder, and he's walking through the rubble, but he's come to a point in his life where he triumphs, and he realizes that that unity and love is the most important thing in the world. And so I've tried to incorporate elements like African symbols. You know, like at the top, it has this image, and basically it means hearts are linked. And then of course it just says unity, and then love. And within it, because I'm Christian, it does have the cross, the idea of embracing the things from the heavens and the earth and bringing them together. And peace is a very large role in that. You know, the idea that, you know, we can actually bring peace to others. And, you know, there's a beauty in imperfection, I think. The idea that I think so many of us think that everyone has to be perfect, and if they're not perfect, then we try to not include them. You know, the idea that oh, maybe whether it's, you know, whatever it is, you know, from the gender, color, religion, whatever, you know, people make up themselves to be better than others. But I think that in our imperfection, we're actually made more perfect. And it just really allows us to come forward and help one another, serve one another in love. And so, like I said, I was very drawn to this story. I think there's just so many wonderful elements within it that we can learn from. And so the idea of just being on that journey and learning and touching others in our lives and lifting one another up is incredibly important to me.
Well, thank you for that. That's really moving, and I think we all pick bits of that from the story, but also relating it back to our own experiences. And, you know, like you said, you've put not just the symbols from Africa, but symbols of your own identity, your faith into the works. And I think that's very powerful to, you know, bring that element of yourself into the work that you do. Ernesto, so I'm going to pick on something that Jimmy said about you, and said to, and I want to relate this back to, you know, you talked about doing the cartoons and that feeling of being a child again with the story, and I just thought that was a really lovely feeling, but it was also one that I think we don't feel a lot nowadays, especially with everything that we're doing. And so how do you use art in your community work, for example? So moving from this particular interpretation, and how do you recreate those feelings and those childlike feelings of wonder and such in your community work?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so it depends. I'm very much an emotional artist. So it really depends on what I'm feeling at the moment and what is inspiring me at the moment. So when I initially read the story, that's how I felt. I feel to be back to my childhood. I'm originally, or at heart, I'm an illustrator. I love doing illustrations, comic type illustrations, animated characters, things like that. But over the years, of course, as an artist, sometimes you have to evolve and try different mediums. So I've tried printmaking. I'm a printmaker as well. And I work with other mixed media, but being a visual artist in illustrations, I feel like I can easily and more freely come up with feeling for for what I want to convey. And so when it comes to creating artwork for certain movements and certain groups that I'm a part of, and coming up with messages, whether they're about social justice or about environmental justice, or the houseless issue that we have here in Las Vegas. It all depends on really what I'm feeling and how I can best convey that feeling onto paper, or onto a canvas, or onto something where somebody will be able to see it and identify with it. And so it all really depends on my emotion at the time when I'm creating the piece, really. So I feel that when did an opportunity, or when given a not necessarily an assignment, but when given the again, like I mentioned, an opportunity to create something, I really need to connect with it in that way where I feel it. So when I created this piece in particular, there are two pieces created. One of them was more of that comic sense, and then the other one that I created is called the Never Walker. I don't have either of the pieces here with me where I'm at, but the piece that I created, I wanted it to be a little bit more dark, a little bit more science fiction aspect of it. And so if you've seen the illustration of the second piece I created, the body is also separated, where it's when you look at the piece, it's more of like a Gulliver's Travels, where this body of a man is laying on the ground, and it's like a giant, and the arms, the legs, and the torso have all been sectioned off. Every limb basically created their own society, in a sense. And so in that version, I feel that the body never connected with itself. It never organized itself, and it never unified. And so you look at the different societies that each limb has created, and although in their own individual aspect, it's not, the body is not what it could be if it were unified. And so when I created that piece, there was a lot of feelings that I was going through, where it felt like my own community and the city I live in, people are very divisive, are very divided right now. And there's a lot of issues that are gone, that have divided many of the communities, of communities that are fighting for these social justice, that are advocating for homes for the homeless, but people are going about it in so many different ways that it's creating a division. And so that's what I was feeling at that time when I reread the story, and there was a second opportunity to participate in another exhibition. And when I was feeling this, I poured that into that second illustration. And so for me, sometimes it really depends. Like I mentioned, I'm very much an emotional artist, so it depends on what is going on in my life and what is going around in my community, in my immediate community, and in the outside world as well. And that will really affect how I go into a piece, because I might have something totally different in my mind for what I want to create, but yet that's not exactly what I'm feeling inside. And so I usually go with my emotions to be able to create something. And so there's that difference with the two pieces that I created, where one was a little bit more playful on the comic side, and it really showed the character, the man, kind of like in that in that position, where he's falling and he's just confused, and it's right before he actually realizes that, okay, you know, it's better if all my limbs together. And in the second piece, the limbs never end up working together, so they create their own individual societies, and you can see that division and that separation in the second piece. And that's where that darkness comes in. It's more of a bleak look into the future if we do not unify and if we do not gather together and work for a better future.
That's definitely so powerful. And what you mentioned in terms of it being called the Never Walker, I thought that was, you know, it's that could have been, that potential is encapsulated just in that particular title as well. And but what I found was really interesting between yours and Laura's works, and I think a couple of the others, is that the interpretation that both of you had these two figures where you know, they were dismembered, they were in pieces, and both of those themes, you know, come out quite strongly. I think you were saying, Ernesto, that, you know, you did the two different interpretations of the work, of the text, because of what you were feeling at any given time, and, you know, your interactions and engagements. But I think also the fact that we come to it in such different ways. So in my particular case, where I was doing the visuals, you know, I well, in my case, they were on fire. You know, they were whole, but there was that conflict, and that was actually what I was focusing on as well. That there was this conflict within that was then giving rise to something else that was, you know, the end result, which was the person who ended up walking and, you know, did actually get something positive out of it after that whole tussle between all the different limbs on, you know, who was better, who was stronger, all of that. So it's just a very different interpretation, and I think, you know, we all focused on different aspects of that. So but the part that I think all of us did work with was the unity, that at the end of it brought unity of the body and power to the body. But what I guess in that sense of we all seem to be working with themes around power and how unity brings power, but also powerlessness of other groups and other symbols and in our works. So maybe you know, these sort of balances of power that you've encountered in creating your works and in putting it together. And this is just open, so Jimmy, Ernesto, and Laura, anyone can answer.
Well, I like to sort of just elaborate on some of the comments by Ernesto and Laura. Laura reminded me when she said the elder was standing on the sort of these dismembered pieces, a lot of Walter Benjamin's Angel, right? Where he describes an angel of I believe an angel of time. I can't recall exactly the name. And there's this angel caught in the storm of progress, right? And progress doesn't allow the angel to turn around and look towards the future. The angel and the winds have entrapped him in a position where he's looking to the past, and in the past, what he's seen is the whole accumulation of destruction, you know, of war and everything is accumulated with this concept of progress, and he can't turn around and look at the future as to what lays ahead or what could be constructed. So I think Laura points that out, and I think. In her interpretation, but it's a very strong point. Also, the exhibit and what was really had to do a lot, and I think what made me think this right now as we're discussing this is Laura and Ernesto's. It's sort of a conversation, intercultural conversation regarding the perception of of continents with no history. And so, in the dignity in Laura and the struggle of in Ernesto's and many others, and Mario Avila's and of the other artists that were part of it, had a lot to do also with the fact of a history that is written, by Ngugi, to acknowledge that there is history and it does have history, and that it has literature, it has culture. So I think these are the conversations that take place when communities are in struggle from different diverse areas and spaces, the sense of not having history. And so this exhibit and the personal interpretations also had to do a lot with recuperating that, acknowledging that. I think that's important. In terms of the Never Walker, and power, I think power somehow is always connected with the domination. And I think as to how can we exercise power without domination, is a challenge. And I think that's the question that we're having today. And that's one of the main questions, with the story, of how can we come together, how can we unite, how can we exercise governance without power being sort of like the sole goal of management and control. And so when we acknowledge unity in a sense, and focus on what really needs to change or how we're going to change, and really actually have that conversation and not be fragmented, like all the limbs, like becoming different states. We really have that conversation, and ask ourselves, what is power? And ask ourselves, why, when we think, what are we thinking, and why do we think that? I think these are all the conversations that were coming out, that were taking place. And as you can see, there has been for centuries a call for unity, a call for acknowledging the dismemberment. And I think Ngugi, in one of his books, talks about dismemberment. How can we put the limbs back together? How can we come back together? I think that's been one of the biggest challenges since colonization. And how can we move forward, or what is it that we think that impedes that unity, that impedes us from moving forward, that impedes several groups uniting together, to be able to help, come with solutions for the homeless, the houseless that Ernesto is speaking, or Laura's, or Mario Avila, who also was an exile living in Los Angeles from Guatemala, who has a lot in common with Ngugi in terms of imprisonment, for being activists. So power is one of the main themes in the exhibit, and is one of the main themes also in the book. And it was a concern because I had that in mind. So that's the question through the art and through this exhibit, which traveled, to two locations, two venues, continues to ask. And as you can see in the conversation, we're still, as you pointed out, this is a central theme.
That's definitely very pertinent. Anything from Ernesto or Laura on this, on power, and I guess power and powerlessness, really, because those are two different things that are happening in the same image, for I think all three of us.
Excuse me if I cough. But it was reminding me of a story that my husband had told me, and it's really just the story of a rabbi, and he's teaching his students. And the rabbi asks the students, how do you know when the night is past and the day has begun? And so, his smartest student answers, when you look from the field and you can distinguish your field from your neighbor's field. And then the second one says, when you're in the field and you can distinguish your house from your neighbor's house. And then I believe the third one says something like, when you look out in the distance and you can tell what kind of animal it is that you're looking at. And finally, the fourth student says, I know, he says, when you look at a flower and you can tell what color the flower is. And then the rabbi gets upset and says, no, none of you understand. Is that all that we do? We divide and separate ourselves, splitting the world into pieces and fragments. And he says, isn't the world broken enough? And he says, that the night is past when you can look at a man or a woman and you see your brother or sister. And I think that's such an important thing, to know that we are all connected. We are brothers and sisters. And there's a Christian band that I actually like to listen to, and they're called For King and Country. And there's a song, it's called Together. And it says, I see you, my brother. I see you, my sister. And it says, if we rise together. And if we fall together. And I find that song so beautiful because it rings true to me, that if we are not well, then all of us are not well. And it's not just their problem, it's our problem. If someone is suffering, we all need to be a part of that suffering, and we need to lift one another up.
Very important words, especially in this time with everything that's going on. We've been seeing quite a lot of that happen here as well, in terms of us and them. And there's a term that happens, it pops up in popular media, NIMBY, not in my backyard. And then that's the question that, it's countered with the idea that if you are rich enough, rather than building a longer fence, build a longer table.
Right.
If you are able to bring people in rather than shutting them out and seeing more about commonalities. Ernesto, would you have anything to add on the idea, on the question?
Yeah. So that also do here in community space where I'm speaking out of today. I am at a space called the Side Cafe, and it's an autonomous space, and we provide free programming, free classes to the community. And so for the past 8 years, and for the past actually 6 years here at this space, I have been a part of a program that provides free martial arts classes, specifically Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I myself have been training for about 8 years now, and I've been training and teaching out of this space as well. And so one of the things that being an instructor and a martial artist has taught me is that sense of what is power then, how do we identify what power is, and also the privilege that it has, right? When you are a person that has a position of power. And so I think we need to really look at our privilege first, our individual privilege. And for example, I myself I identify as a male, heterosexual male, right? So just in that element alone, just in that describing that, I know that I have certain power over people just because I'm a man, just because I am a straight man. I have certain power over certain individuals, right? And so understanding that privilege, all to see other people and really try to understand where they are in that power dynamic, right? And so I always try to make sure that I stand back and give people the space that they deserve, so that they don't feel like overpowering the either the environment or wherever it is that we are. And so for when I am teaching out of this community space, I understand that I am the facilitator, the instructor, right? But I also want to make that I always address everybody and tell them that I am a community member just like everybody else here, and that I don't have any more privilege or power than they do, other than the fact that I have been training for a while, but I have put that I have put the work to train and get to that level where I feel confident with my abilities, right? So with that, one has to also realize that position of power, like I mentioned, that privilege that they have, and be able to not use it and not exploit it in a bad way. So I think everybody needs to really be able to look into themselves first and look at that privilege first, because in one way or another, we are more privileged than another person that doesn't have that same power, right? And we may think, well, I'm a powerless person myself, or I may not have that much power, but a lot of times we don't necessarily see that privilege or that power that we have. So I think identifying that internally is one of the key steps in really taking those initial that initial path towards colonization, or trying to find a way to not fit into this this colonial system. And so I think just searching within and finding that understanding that privilege or that own power that you have.
Yeah, no, definitely understanding our own different, I guess, levels of power and privilege that we have in different ways, depending on all the different intersections that we, sit at, whether it's race, class, sexuality, gender, all of them, they definitely contribute to our experiences of the world, and not just our own experiences, but how we even project some of those experiences onto the people we engage with. And I'm just going to pick on a couple of things that you've said there and kind of tease them out. We're heading towards, I guess, closing very soon. But, bringing back that idea back to the art and back to how we engage with this world in this visual way. And by allowing these stories to be, I guess, heard and seen in different ways. And we are creating a space. We're creating a space of intercultural conversation, I think, as you were saying, Jimmy, but also of these sort of in-between spaces where we are putting some of ourselves and then we are inviting others in to those spaces, almost in Borderlands type, where people have these multiple identities and they engage with the works that we and they are doing in this way. So I feel like the art space in itself is creating a Borderland space. I'm trying to remember the word, but drawing on some of the works of Gloria Anzaldúa and the that sort of space in between. So just wanted to kind of bring that through. And yes, that's the word I was looking for. It's like I usually know it when it's in front of me, and then I was just like, hang on, I'm completely blanking, and trying to go through my notes. But no, thanks for that.
Yeah, the stage
but
of
yeah,
suspension.
it is very much. I feel like art in itself is providing that space.
Yeah. Yes. Well, if I'll what I could say is that this is precisely one of the ideas, about creating the exhibit. It had to do, first of all, the collaboration between, let's say, two narratives. The majority of the artists were Latinos, and we had the pleasure to have one artist from Nigeria, sent his artwork all the way from Nigeria. But my concern was the Latinos, Latina interpretation of Ngugi's story was very important, because I think with their own their own personal particularities, their singularities as artists, as Latino, Latina, Mexican American, or Chicano, or Latino, is adding sort of like a co-author in the visual interpretation. And so I would see this as an intercontinental, intercultural activity, because I think it's important for us to emphasize the intercontinental behind the visual interpretation. I think we add more, as in Google says, the more languages, the more oxygen. The less languages is like breathing. He said carbon monoxide. So this is also a very important extension, because the story allows for each invited guest, or even the reader, to look at from their community, from the perspective of different angles of and different questions, and evaluate, some of the challenges. So that was important. Empowering language, empowering the fact that it was written in 101 languages. That's very empowering, because the message is now traveling in different spaces, and some spaces that are suspended, but nevertheless, it's adding to the conversation as it travels. So I think that was part of what was going on in creating. We've had several artists that did the interpretation of Upright, but with Mesoamerican interpretation, the Mayan and Aztec interpretation, motifs, deities. And that was also very surprising too, especially when Ngugi came and he saw the Mesoamerican interpretation with deities and philosophy and cosmovision. That was also very insightful too. So it allowed for all of us to really connect. That's important, I think, to examine what we're reading, but not just what we're reading, but how we read it and how we understand it, and to know that the origins of it have a specific language and a specific way of interpreting storytelling through a certain cosmovision, and the different languages that will experience that too. I want to make a quick note right now. I'm reading a book that is called Languages in Cosmovision, and the challenge, it's called like the devil's language. Any language that wasn't Spanish or English, any of the European languages, was considered the devil's language. And in this book, it says that every 15 days, one language is in the process of disappearing. That there's 6,700 or so, close to 7,000 languages that exist today. There's 68 different languages spoken in Mexico alone. And so when you think of a language disappearing, it scares you, because there's a lot of dynamics, there's a lot of history, storytelling, and visions of how interpreting, their moment and their world is in the process of being lost. So these type of it, at least the creating this is also allowing for the continuation, how it started with a specific language and how it's now being interpreted in different languages. Maybe not the dominant language, but languages, that also have their own right in existing and telling their stories and interpreting and translating other stories as well, which I think is big. So I wanted to just touch on that. I wanted to mention this because I know it's a big part of the discussion and the background that that Halada is doing in terms of translation and interpretation.
Thank you for that. Definitely one that I might even look out for that book, because it sounds really interesting. Around
I have it right here.
Yeah. What? Oh, that would be great to have a look at that. Oh, excellent. My Spanish is terrible, I have to say. But
I'll text you information.
I can understand a little bit, but yeah, my Spanish is not great. I think maybe we'll head towards wrapping up, but I think this has been a really great conversation, and we've kind of touched on all of these little pockets of, and we could talk about art and interpretation and community and activism all day, but I think yeah, we only have a limited time. But I want to invite Laura and Ernesto to maybe share a point each about your experiences in working with this text and with your artwork, and maybe reflecting on that idea of it being that space for intercultural or to be a more liminal space for identities to come together and to converse.
I think that for me, I felt like this piece it really allowed me to grow as an artist, because I was able to just play around with different ideas. And I think the inclusion of the words is something that I had never done. And I think that it doesn't necessarily, I mean, whether the words are in English or Spanish or whatever the language is, I think just being able to create something that anyone from any culture can understand, I think that's an important part. So I felt very blessed to be able to do this and to be a part of this. So I'm trying to think of anything else. I think one of the things that I do want to comment on is when I created this piece, the idea of what we fill ourselves with, that those things spill out to those around us. And so I really felt that I was able to triumph in that when creating this. So
definitely, I do feel that when I was looking at your piece as well, and that yeah, like I said, there's that part of you that's in it, but it's also something that quite a lot of other people, including myself, will find bits of ourselves in as well. Yeah. And you, Ernesto?
Yeah, thank you. What I would get creating this was that ability, the opportunity to create visual interpretation of a type of creation story or of a fable from a different culture, from a whole different continent, right? And as an artist, I've created a few different visuals, different pieces for different creation stories. A few of them have been more Mexican, such as Mayan and Aztec, Nahuatl, and a few other American creation stories, The Alone, and now with this one I created for Ngugi story, I feel like it's important for artists to really connect to other cultures story, because you can identify with them and relate to those stories because they're very universal, where all these different cultures, whether they're continents apart, they can still connect at a fundamental level when it's about things that relate to unity, when it's things that relate to the growth of their own people, right? And so I think these stories are very important because they can have such just an individual, where it brings their past, their ancestors to life. And if somebody can capture that in their own sense, then and translate that, regardless of what language it was, but to be able to visually capture that, then I think it's really important. And I feel very lucky to be able to have that opportunity to create something for a story like Upright Revolution. And so to me, I just feel very honored and blessed to be able to have that opportunity, and that it has reached so many different people. hopefully in the future, the piece and the story can still kind of live on individually, but at the same time they always be unified because they were, or at least images and these visuals that we've created as artists were for this story, our interpretations of it. But I feel like that's what's important, right? To be able to get different people from different cultures to be able to work together and create something beautiful. Thank you.
Great. And thank you all for falling in so early on your end and speaking to us today. And, thank you for just the time and sharing so much of yourselves in this project, and also for this talk. And I really hope we can have more conversations soon about this, because there's just so much I want to talk about with all the works that you've done. So thank you very much for joining us for the symposium and for this particular conversation.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.